paving the way for future missions beyond.
Hello everybody, welcome at last to this live stream, this long awaited live stream. Thankfully, Mr. James M. Skipper agreed to do this again because it was so much fun. And once again, we're joined by the Casual Spaceman, who I think you all know. They're both here, both ready and waiting. No sound issues this week, none at all. And in fact, we got the guys, as you can see, on video conferencing. So I'm going to bring them in now, and here we go. Good evening, James. Good evening, Casual.
Good evening.
How are
you, Mr. Sensible, and all your guests out there?
How are you doing, sir?
Okay.
Yeah, the video will always be delayed, I'm afraid, which is really disconcerting, isn't it? And how are you, Casual?
I'm not too bad. Still got a little bit of a flu thing, but I've got rid of most of it, but I've still got this rotten cough. But I'm still in good spirits, though. I'm still good, and I'm here, and I'm really happy to be here talking to Jim again, which is great.
Absolutely. So, Jim, have you had a busy week?
It's busy. It's amazing how busy you can stay even when you're retired. But no, I'm not doing a whole lot of keeping up with things.
Do you keep up with all the stuff about NASA and the space program and so on?
No, not as much as a fan would. No, I really don't. Just what I see in the news.
I suppose it was like a job for you then.
Yes. Well, it was both. You know, it was almost a hobby, and it was fun. It was a job, a lot of stress. The reporting was the tough part.
So I've just been asked to turn up your audio. It should be okay. It's me. So hopefully, guys in the chat, let me know. And they've actually asked Casual if you can turn up your volume, but I've overridden it a bit. But if you can, that'd be great.
I don't think I could turn up mine anymore. I'll go a little bit closer to the microphone because I was a little bit further away than I usually am. So,
and I've just maxed it. I've just maxed it at my end. So hopefully that will do.
So how's it sound in the chat then, guys? If you let us know.
Hopefully they can hear you a bit better now because it is turned up right up.
Yeah.
I've got someone saying sounds fine.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well,
that should be right.
Well,
can some of the others talk on the chat line, or do they only do text? Yeah, I'm new at this.
They're only doing text. Yeah, it's better. I've basically I've pulled the video conferencing images and sound into my broadcast software. I had it turned down slightly. I've now turned it up to max, so I've got no more I can give. So hopefully that's enough. So, yes, I'll turn myself down and whole stream up. I can turn myself down a bit if I'm. There we go. But I can't turn. I can't turn up anyone else any further. That's it now. Yep.
Oh well, as long as they can hear us at least even roughly, you know, it's cool. It's all good, isn't it? Really.
Well, at least you two are clear this week. Well, you were clear last week. Well, actually, you were clear, Jim. It's just that we kept hearing us. Yeah. So, people.
Yeah, you were getting feedback through my smartphone.
That's right, but that's all sorted now, which is brilliant.
It might have actually been me because a lot of people have been complaining on when I'm on Discord. For some reason, you get feedback, so it might have actually been through me, possibly. So I don't really know why because I use headphones, so I don't know.
Well, it all seems okay. In the text chat, I'm just going to drop a link to the Google form. So if you want to submit a question for to be asked to Jim, there's the link, and they will be at my discretion. So if there's anything silly or time wasting, I guess we won't be doing it. Or if there's anything rude, that won't go in either, because I suspect we might get rather a lot of questions. So I apologise if we can't get through them all. So Jim, was there anything in particular that you wanted to cover or wanted to tell us about that you think we find particularly interesting?
I've decided that what I want to do is say something about the most interesting question that I've received.
Okay.
And it leads into the basic functions of a spacesuit and life support system.
Right.
To sort out the answer to that question. Do you remember when we talked, I believe, Sunday afternoon? To
Yes.
do this comm check, you had a question for me?
I think I had several questions. Which one was that?
Well, there was a tricky question, and it had to do with if the
the
crew
oxygen.
member, astronaut, whoever was in the suit,
Yep.
breathes oxygen and breathes it out into the suit, why doesn't the suit pressure keep climbing?
Well, I just always assumed that, like with divers, they're taking oxygen in from the tank, breathing it, and it would be vented. But you've obviously put me right
That's
on
right.
that, didn't you?
Well, yes, but it was a question that had never come up in the 35 years that no training on it, nothing. That's what I'm saying. It's the best question I've ever heard.
Oh, wow, thank you.
The same thing applies to pilots using an oxygen mask. They breathe oxygen in, the oxygen goes out in the cabin. We had to be careful that our lock observers, the lock didn't get enriched with oxygen as the lock observer. But that's not the thing in the suit, though. As I pointed out, the suit regulator will stop supplying oxygen if the pressure gets too high.
Yep.
Okay, so there's no more oxygen coming in. But let's follow through the initial pressurization of the suit.
Yep.
After the crewman dons the suit, gets everything on, turns his fan on, which circulates the gas through the suit. Also, it circulates water through his cooling garment, puts his helmet on. The first thing it does is switch the O2 actuator to an IV position, which pressurizes the suit to 1 psi-d.
Pounds per square inch?
Pounds per square inch differential.
Differential.
Our gauge for people, I think back in the steam ages, they used gauge pressure. That's what they talked about, gauge pressure. Pressure above your surrounding conditions.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's at 1 psi-d, which kind of stretches the suit because you're going to go into a suit pressure decay check after that, and you want the suit kind of stretched out. So when you're ready if everything checks out, it switches the O2 actuator back through the off position to the press position, which quickly pressurizes the suit to about 4.7. Someone probably knows the exact number. That's all I remember. Casual Spaceman may. Is it 4.7 psi?
I've heard variations, but somewhere between 4 and 6. So yeah, you're probably about right.
Well, it's not over 5.
Definitely not over 5. Okay.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So the suit pressure goes to 5 pounds per square inch over the ambient pressure, and it makes a sharp corner. It goes up fast, turns level. You wait and give the suit a chance to stretch a little bit there, and then put the pressure actuator back into off. Now let's get to your question. In thinking about going through that, I keep saying Dr. Sensible, but anyway, Mr. Sensible.
That's all right.
Okay, an astronaut will breathe oxygen from the suit, or air. In this case, he still has air. Oxygen is absorbed into the body, and it does its thing in the body, and it comes out as carbon dioxide or CO2.
Yep.
And I believe that if you get a liter of oxygen to get into your body, a liter of CO2 comes back out. It's at a higher density than the oxygen, but I think it occupies the same pressure because you got the same temperature. Physiologists would work this out.
Yeah.
And then there is a factor. It's not always a 100% reaction. Okay, so he breathes oxygen in, CO2 comes out, mixes with the rest of the air in the suit. Breathes more oxygen in, CO2 comes out, and you see what happens. you gradually get more and more CO2 into the suit, and you have less and less oxygen. And so that's I guess the first thing you'd say about a spacesuit is it has to maintain pressure, adequate total pressure, adequate oxygen partial pressure. So that's the first function. A second one is probably to remove the CO2. So you now have several liters maybe of CO2 replacing a few liters of oxygen in the suit. They go through, as the fan circulates the suit atmosphere, goes through a canister of lithium hydroxide, and the CO2 is absorbed on the surface of the granules of lithium hydroxide. And that takes that liter of CO2 and crunches it down to the size of a granule of lithium hydroxide that it's stuck to.
Yeah.
So that liter is gone. All right, what else? Oh, and then it goes through an activated charcoal filter and a...
Lost sound.
Hello, Jim. Jim, we lost your sound. Still lost your sound, Jim. I don't know what's happened there. Oh dear. Oh no.
Not now, please, not now.
Oh. Yeah, there might be a volume control on the cable, Jim. You can hear me? Can you hear us? Yes, you can still hear us.
Oh, we can hear us, but no, we can't hear you, Jim, at all.
Not a thing, it just dropped out.
Yeah, it just suddenly dropped out. It was fine for a little while, and then it just suddenly dropped out. Is there a control on your cable, maybe, or?
It might, as well as the volume, there might be a mute on the cable. Still can't hear you.
No.
Oh no!
Oh no!
What?
Oh Lord, not now.
Can you?
I can hear you now, Jim. Yes. You came back then.
Okay, am I back now?
You're back on voice and your picture's frozen, but let's go with that for now.
Yeah.
Maybe your picture
Okay.
will jump back in.
Well, it was that explanation was getting long, but I want to point out that in okay, you got to keep the suit pressure and the oxygen partial pressure at the proper levels, remove CO2, and in addition to the CO2 that comes out of the lungs, hello, Lewis, my son just showed up. You got a bunch of water vapor coming out of the lungs, constantly putting out water vapor.
Yeah.
So that has to be removed, and it's condensed in the cooling system and sort of sucked back into one of the water tanks. And then what else? The heat. A guy can stand to be in that suit without cooling for maybe at most 10 minutes.
Wow.
And
I
then
guess
you've
it
got
is
to come
highly insulated, isn't it?
Yes. And it has a rubber bag, and you know how that, the inner layer is some kind of rubber bag type of thing. So let me, while people think about that, I think I've covered every one of those.
Well, Jim, one of the questions that's already come in is from a guy called Chrisma, and and it's relevant to this. He asks, well, what happens to the other gases that may end up in a spacesuit, like methane, for example?
I believe the activated charcoal is supposed to take care of that.
Filter all that
Well, let
out.
me go ahead. As soon as the leak check is finished, remember the O2 actuator has been off. They go back to the press position. It bumps the suit pressure back up to 4.7. Then you open a purge valve. The purge valve relieves enough of the atmosphere in the suit so that the differential pressure drops back to about 1 psi. And they do that, maybe it was 30 minutes, close the purge valve,
Right.
switch from press back to IV, and wait there for 3.5 hours to pre-breathe.
3.5 hours.
Right.
Is this what we were talking about as well the other day with the female astronauts originally having to pre-breathe for longer?
Yes. Originally, they were, I believe the pre-breathe had gone from 2.5 to 3 hours. And the assumption was that women, because of more body fat, would need to pre-breathe longer to get all the nitrogen out of the fat. So Kathy Sullivan was the first woman astronaut to be in the program to do an EVA.
And sorry, Jim, when we were discussing this the other day, we were saying that this is the opposite way from divers suffering from the bends when they're down at pressure, excuse me, and they're coming up. The nitrogen bubbles in their blood if they come up too fast, doesn't it? But this is going the other way.
That's right. And so they have the dive tables. They can come up a certain amount and wait a period of time and then continue the ascent to water level, surface. And this is the opposite of that. But you do all the pre-breathing while you're waiting at sea level pressure. Now, why? I don't care whether people see me or not, but I'm curious about it. Okay, that was a long explanation. As I was saying earlier, these can get long. I can get too detailed. So let's try some questions.
Right. Well, I've actually this would be a good point just to read out a couple of the super chat messages. Mr. John Watson super chatted £5 sterling, saying, "Well done for organising this, Dr. Sensible." But thank you for that, John. And there's another John Rapp.
That one down now. It's going to be Dr. Sensible for a while
yes.
now.
But there's another one from Mr. John Rapp, who super chatted $5 Australian to you, Jim. He says, "Good day from Oz, Jim. Was there a memorably unique solution to a problem? Something from way out of left field?"
Good question.
I suppose that's the Apollo 13 lash up.
But problems can be simple. Those of you who have flown at high altitude or may otherwise have been at reduced pressure have probably encountered ear problems. And this is so simple that I hate to even mention it as a problem. But when you got an astronaut in the suit, it's a problem for them. Okay, this one astronaut, I probably wouldn't name him if I could remember. I think I know who it was. Had ear problems on the way from vacuum, where his suit pressure was 4.7, down to 5, which was one of the staging points, 5 psi in the airlock. And there his suit pressure would have been 9.7, because he was in the precipice. It kept him 4.7 above the surrounding pressure. Well, in any pilots in the group who have gone through oxygen mask training, had to pull your mask off at altitude to see if you got hypoxic and had ear trouble repressing from 40,000 feet?
Well, we'll see if anyone pops up with that in the chat.
Okay, and they may have heard the chamber operators or someone say you need to bump the chamber, because that was the usual solution. You reduce the pressure, hope that the person having ear problems could get it corrected.
Is that just a case of swallowing, like when you're just flying in a plane, and you get the pain, a good yawn or something equalizes?
It's hard to do that in a suit or sometimes with an oxygen mask on. So this astronaut was in pain. His suit pressure was well above the 5 psi in the chamber. He was safe, 100% oxygen. But the safety officer who had formerly worked with pilot training chambers said, bump the chamber, bump the chamber. Well, you can't do that. And the solution was for the crewman to open his purge valve and let his suit pressure go back toward 5 psi. So that's something we had not thought of doing. It came to mind. He reduced his pressure till his ears felt better, closed the purge valve, and we went along normally.
Right.
Sorry, you still there, Jim?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh right, sorry. I just got
the story.
I just got a fright for a second that you dropped out again.
I thought I dropped out there for a minute to be sensible as well. I was waiting for you to reply.
Okay.
Well, I have been through to qualify for the being a test subject. I think you've posted some of those pictures of me in the Gemini suit.
Yeah.
I had to go through Air Force physiological training, pass the Class 3 physical. And in those days, we went to, in the early days, to Brooks. I think it was a medical facility out in San Antonio. The Brooks Air Force Base. For that training, it included being in a suit. It wasn't really a partial pressure suit, but it wasn't a full oxygen vented suit.
Yeah.
There was a face seal, and between the visor and the face seal was 100% oxygen. And they did rapid depresses from a fighter cabin pressure to the surrounding pressure, whatever it would have been. We also had to do that and reach for an oxygen mask and put it on. It was simple things, but it was all new to me. And I believe I explained to you that I was so hesitant to get on the ejection seat trainer. They wouldn't certify us unless we did exactly what a pilot had to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Because they were going to give us a certification card. They said the next thing you know, you'll use that and get in a fighter plane. And, they can't have that if I hadn't been on the ejection seat. So I waited until I was the last one. They used a shell from a high caliber artillery of some kind. It's bigger than my thumb. And the cylinder that goes in gets very hot after you do 6 or 8 people. So I got the highest ride of that whole day. And that's some ride too.
So you'd have done better to go first.
I bet it was. So how did you, when you first put the suit on and you first experienced it, and especially with those rapid decompression and things like that, how did it feel? Was it really uncomfortable? Did it make you feel uncomfortable, or how did it feel when you first were doing this?
Well, I have a tendency toward claustrophobia, and when they closed the visor, it felt like I was being smothered in a plastic bag or a paper bag.
Yeah.
But once you get over that part, the rest of it isn't too bad.
Yeah. Just getting over the initial shock of it. Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's a couple of comments in chat, Jim. You're talking about pilots and divers and so on. One guy said, John Watson again, said, I used to be a commercial diver and I found the accounts of astronauts very familiar. And Mr. Gary Graham says, as a diver, I've suffered from reverse block on surfacing and lost blood and snot from burst sinuses. Oh dear.
Well, typically, certainly for me, it was going from a low pressure back to a higher pressure. So from a high altitude back to a low altitude. But one of my friends there at work was the opposite. He had a problem going from high pressure to low pressure, and not the other way.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of questions have popped in. Actually, I'll skip past this one, not because it's not interesting, but because there were some that I think were more suited. Well, one guy, Mr. Hugh Jas, says, I'm a project manager and I'm in awe of the achievements of the Apollo program. What was the major factor in getting everything done and done well? And Jim, you're back on video. Excellent. So what was the major factors in getting everything done and done well?
Having a lot of people working a lot of hours.
Yeah, a lot of hard work.
And there were the work I did seemed to be kind of ordinary work that plumbers and electricians would do. I know it's maybe, what? I heard someone in the background. Okay, but you have to have confidence to do what I was doing. You saw the video of the friend of mine who was in the spacesuit and lost suit pressure and lost in consciousness. The guy who was directing that test stopped directing tests. He worked basically with facility systems. From then on, he never mentioned anything about it, but he didn't want to do that again.
I suppose the other guy's life was in his hands, wasn't it?
Yes. And this is not to say that volunteers are any less worthy than an astronaut, but the implications of having a problem with an astronaut in the chamber were far greater, at least in my mind, and I'm sure in the minds of others too.
Oh, if you need to, if it's a call you need to, are you all right there, Jim?
No.
That's right.
We get lots of calls.
Okay.
Jim, I'd be really interested because we were talking about what it actually takes to get everything done earlier as well. I mean, I would like to try and get a sense of the pace of work. Going right away from Project Mercury through to Gemini, through to Apollo, and all the what was the pace of development and pace of work, especially from the side of things that you were working on. I mean, was it really quite rapid? A lot of hours, a lot of people, and how did you feel about it, and how were you coping with that, and how many hours did you sort of put into that as well?
It depended. We were working with several facilities, and the big thermal vacuum chambers were busy. They had fellows going around the clock, well, not around the clock, but they'd work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Finally, rules had to be set because you do that much work, and you're not up to par anymore. So they put in rules that said they had to have a break, especially if they would try to get the facility ready, and you do checkouts of the facility systems and checkouts of all the facilities combined together, maybe do some unmanned vacuum tests to show that it works. And if you've had people working 4 to 6 weeks, 12 hours a day, and then say, okay, now you sit on the test stand and operate the thing while we test, they might go to sleep and not really be aware of what's going on. So it was so bad, they had to set those rules.
Yeah.
And it could be kind of a panic. You work toward a flight schedule. The flight schedule might slip, give you a little time to catch up. You always hoped you'd be ahead of things so that when it did come the day to test, you'd be ready, and we never wanted to hold up a flight schedule. Certainly, we didn't want to miss a schedule with an astronaut coming over, that type of thing.
Well,
that's kind of a vast question.
Yeah, I know it was a bit of a question, but you kind of from things that I've read and books that I've read, and you kind of got a sense from people like yourselves and astronauts that it was quite a fast-paced environment, all the way through the different projects. And I just wanted to get it more from a sense of from an engineer's point of view, particularly from your perspective. So yeah, it is a loaded question. I understand fully.
Well, what I could say is that it speeds up and you run at a frantic pace, and then you stop.
Yeah.
And wait.
Hurry
and
up.
then it picks up again. Yeah. Hurry up and wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were times when we would go on a round-the-clock shift to get ready for a test, and have to take, even the engineers had to show up at do a midnight shift occasionally.
Did you? I mean,
And
during.
then,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
no, you go ahead.
I mean, during your busy times, did you have family of your own at that time, or did that come later?
No, I had a family of my own at that time.
And this is probably going to be a loaded question as well. How did they feel about you working so much?
And that was just accepted. Well, the children were small.
Yeah.
And my wife accepted that as part of the job. You know, a lot of people had worse schedules than I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Jim, it's no surprise, but the question has just been asked via Super Chat. Miss April Van Ryn Super Chatted $5 Canadian and asks, are there any differences between male and female suits, i.e. the lavatory option?
we knew it was going to come.
It's going to come. Let's get that out of the way.
Well, show them the link to that article. You read the article that explains some of that, but yeah. I'm gonna answer. The men started. They call them pilots' relief tubes. Pilots out there, if anybody familiar with a pilot's relief tube, that's what the men used.
I've heard about that.
So for the women, they developed a kind of a super expensive, I call them Pampers, but you know, the elderly used them, and that was it.
Yeah.
So in fact, some people were kind of concerned because they were just going to throw them in the trash. I said, people are going to grab those for souvenirs or worse. And they said, you know, the guy said, what do you mean? Okay. So from what I understand, the men decided that was a better option than the pilot's relief tube. Anybody need to know what a pilot's relief tube is? It was connected, at least I can say this. We had a shop that could build life rafts. You know what life raft material is? That heavy, I don't know, nylon that has rip stop built in. Yeah. So they used that sort of material to make a bag to collect the urine.
Okay.
They tried to avoid eating anything that would give them problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and they probably didn't drink a whole lot. So let's see. We had, I think one female test subject was in the suit for a little bit over 12 hours.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that was kind of a record, but I think since then the guys on orbit, one pair spent 11 hours on an EVA, and then they would have been in the suit for probably an hour before that at least. So how many of you have driven 12 hours, stayed in your car for 12 hours, and
not me,
cross country without a stop?
Are we nearly there yet?
Right.
Well, maybe not 12 hours, but I've been at points when I've been pretty desperate. Yeah.
Right.
Jim, someone's asked. This is a change of subject, probably just as well. Someone has asked. It's Daybreaker Flint has asked, what advice do you have for an aspiring space electronics engineer? Anything to look out for? So anyone who wants to get into the sort of fields you were in, I guess, what should they do?
A basic college degree. I think that's still the requirement. I can't add to that, I think.
Any particular subject would be valuable?
Instrumentation. You got to learn how to. And I did learn that in college. You know, what's the difference between a meter that measures actual cubic feet, actual volume of gas flow, versus standard volume of gas flow, and what difference does it make in a suit, and what does a fan produce actual volumetric flow or mass volume flow? Now, those are things you pick up on the job, at least. Maybe aerospace engineers would get some of that.
Okay.
But the basic degree that I had prepared me for it, and I learned as I went along.
Do you think a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time? You just were fresh out of university college, just as NASA were recruiting heavily.
Well, let me tell you about that. I think I mentioned it. I was they started with moving people to the Houston area for NASA it was called the Manned Spacecraft Center at first, around 60 or 61, somewhere around there. And that's when I was finishing my degree, doing interviews with probably Boeing, and maybe Grumman was there,
yeah.
McDonnell, back before McDonnell Douglas. And then there was an announcement that I think it was a Saturday, they would have government agency recruiters. So and you didn't have to have a schedule. So on a lark, I went over to the student union ballroom. They had placed desks all around the perimeter of the ballroom. You just walked along and found a guy from Houston, Texas. He was the assistant division chief, I believe, with the Life Systems Division. And we talked about it, and he gave me the papers to apply with, and I got a job. I was notified by telegram. Some of you may not are too young to know what a telegram is.
Don't be so quick to nod, Casual. I know what one is, but I've never seen one.
Well, the only reason why, my father was in the army, in the British Army, and when we were living in Germany, they actually used telegrams quite a bit, funny enough. So yeah, I'd seen a few when I was younger, but very young.
Okay. So just sheer luck. I didn't know where Houston, Texas was. I'd only been outside Arkansas one time for a drive across North Texas, which is a long way from Houston.
Yeah.
Hadn't heard of the Manned Spacecraft Center, but it just clicked. Fortune, whatever.
Well, Jim, someone asked, it's Mr. Hugh Jarse again, because I don't know, or I can't recall if you ever met any astronauts, but they were asking, what were the astronauts like as people? Sorry, he's asking.
Well, it was a great variety. Bob Crippen, who flew with John Young on the first shuttle flight, was just a down-to-earth country guy.
Yes.
You've looked at the article I wrote about the SMET test.
Yeah. Which was see if I can remember, Jim. Is it Skylab medical experiments at altitude, something like that?
That's right.
Hey.
Yeah. And okay, the Skylab followed the last Apollo flight to the moon, just to use up the spacecraft and get some experience. Well, you had a clip. I guess that's what I was seeing of the guys running around the lockers.
That was Skylab, yeah.
That was Skylab.
Right at the beginning on the intro.
After that was Apollo-Soyuz, but no one seems to know much about that. Okay, we're astronauts.
Yeah.
I was just looking through some of my old pictures and saw a picture of an astronaut named Jay Apt. And I guess about what I can say is that he seemed to like me. I helped him do some studies. He wanted to see ice or water boil at vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to drop a feather in a rock or something like that. He wanted to see a surgical glove swell up, expand, and vacuum. He wanted all these toys. Well, by then we didn't want anything flammable in the chamber, and he was the one, I think, that got a piece of Mylar, aluminum-coated Mylar. We used those in the chamber some, and a Teflon block so that he could drop both of those at vacuum.
Yeah.
And we had the water. We usually put the water in there for everybody to see, and we typically had that surgical glove hanging so they could watch it inflate
Yeah.
during what we would call, some people tell that the lock observer was at 15,000 feet. They said, how did you ever get the chamber up that high? When we talk about ascending the chamber
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, that's, and how do you produce 0G in a chamber, they would ask.
Yeah.
And you're polite and nice and explain that you can't do that, but that was not, that wouldn't be a smart question.
Well,
Atmospheric pressure equivalent of, in other words, right?
That's right. Yeah. 15,000 feet we understood to be about a half atmosphere.
Half atmosphere.
Yeah.
Well,
and
oh, sorry, Jim. Carry on.
I was just going to say that that was an intermediate pressure, so that if there were an emergency, they would be maybe within 15 or 20 seconds able to get in and do whatever they could. And you saw that in the video
With the guy,
with
yeah.
Jim LeBlanc. The guy came in during the repress, and he didn't do much for him. One little known fact is that the impact of his fall against the steel floor was to knock the plastic bubble of the helmet loose from the neck ring. So just a little bit of trivia.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that Eldon S has asked, were the suits ever tested in zero or low gravity environments, and does that play a role in functionality? I mean, I guess they couldn't be tested in zero gravity until we're up there. But what about low gravity, like the Vomit Comet?
I think they did some of that. I didn't want to get on that thing. Besides being claustrophobic, I get motion sickness, so I wasn't suitable for that sort of thing. But yes, they would practice.
I was going to ask you, actually, that was going to be one of my questions, whether you had actually done that or not. So you've answered that question.
They've always used. I won't say always, but there was always a water tank. Some of it was just to practice exiting from a spacecraft when it's in the water.
Yes.
And then they started doing a test underwater to simulate 0G. Because, if you're stuck underwater and you're balanced with weights that hold the inflated suit at a neutral buoyancy, and that's what they call it, neutral buoyancy facility. You can wave your arms and legs all you want. You're not going anywhere.
No.
So,
and of course,
that's a good training.
We
had a big centrifuge, and they tried to rig up a harness that would allow an astronaut to walk on an inclined surface around the circumference of the centrifuge, and he was supported on an air cylinder type of thing to offset most of the gravity. And they even had a little bicycle that they thought of using on the moon. And so the guy and the operator of the centrifuge would move the centrifuge slowly to keep up with the person suspended below it on that surface. I almost had forgotten about that. Did anyone see The Reluctant Astronaut?
No, not me.
No.
Okay. With Don Knotts, and it was filmed there in that centrifuge building, so get a glimpse of that maybe.
Reluctant
The
astronaut.
centrifuge had such a big motor that when it went through, I believe we were located in that building at one time, and they were doing launch abort, Apollo launch abort sequences. And that thing went through some really weird gyrations to shake the building when it would start or stop.
So would you go in anything like that?
The centrifuge?
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think I was going to, and maybe they said, no, you can't, or maybe I did.
Well, I have.
That's odd.
I've got a total change of subject, Jim. Last time,
Okay.
last time we were talking about. We'll go to this and then back again onto what we're really here for. We were talking about the award. Do you remember that we called Dummy of the Year? Mr. Andrew Stoll has super chatted $5 US. It says, not to be rude, but is Mr. Skipper going to be casting a vote for Dummy of the Year? He should get the deciding vote. Sorry, he should get the deciding vote if there is a tie.
Well,
Are you going to be voting?
maybe if there's a tie. I don't know all those guys well enough. Well, let me mention, we're talking about the centrifuge, and it was the side of the story of a Dummy of the Year award that we had.
Yeah.
And you hear stories that sound unbelievable, but you believe the guys who tell them, you know?
Yeah.
40 years later, you say, were they just pretending? But anyway, here's the claim. The test subjects, chamber operators, lock observers, all of those people had to stay in good physical condition, so they were allowed to do training, physical training, during their work hours. And one thing they did, as they told me, was throw a rope up over the arm of the centrifuge. It was a big metal structure, and so over one of those. And they'd take turns. You'd hold a rope while your buddy climbed to the top on the other end of the rope. It was over this big overhead bar. And supposedly the one holding the rope, and I see Casual smiling, he may know what happened already.
I'm taking
the guy holding the rope said, hey, come down the other side of the rope, which the guy did. He reached over and grabbed the other side, according to the story, and fell right on the guy below him. They didn't. Yeah, I did that once with a pulley and a rope. I had my feet on the other side and pulled on my side and turned upside down. I bet it didn't take a second for my feet to be where my head was and my head where my feet had been.
Yeah.
I learned how to do it, though. How to pull yourself up on the rope and pulley.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going back somewhere else.
Oh, let's have a look at some more questions. From Mr. John Watson, what do you think about the future of human space exploration of the rest of the solar system?
Good question.
Yes, and it's a hard question, but now that these billionaires are getting into the program and have been so successful, I have hopes that this space hotel will actually come to be. I'd like to see a space station around the moon or at one of the Lagrange points that they're talking about, and I don't know whether to speculate that we'll be on Mars in my lifetime or not, but boy, that would be great.
Wouldn't it just?
I love that movie, The Man on Mars, whatever that was called.
The one where the guy got left behind?
Yeah, he was left behind. I think some of the others were killed, but except for the ending when they rescued him, that a little far out.
It was good film, though, wasn't it?
I can add to that. The Blue Origin is the commercial company that seems to be the most committed to what they're calling space tourism, and they're quite committed to this space hotel as well. And they're doing a very similar thing to SpaceX, where they're actually reusing the first stage of the rocket, and they're about to build a very much larger one called New Glenn. Which the main core stage, or at least the first stage, will re-land again upright, just like the SpaceX Falcon rocket, as I'm sure you're aware of. So their aim is to actually have space tourism, but affordable. So hopefully that reusability will actually bring the cost down enough for people to afford to actually spend time in space. But yeah, it's very interesting.
But I wonder, what's the proportion of the cost is the actual physical equipment, which is obviously going to be a lot, and as opposed to the amount of fuel. Even if they could just consistently reuse a launch vehicle like we do with an aircraft, the amount of fuel would still be an incredible amount.
I think that depends on the fuel. Probably Jim would probably agree with it. It depends really on the fuel that you're using. I mean, hydrogen and oxygen is quite often used, with the exception, obviously, with the solid rocket boosters. Or obviously, that's a different fuel altogether. But hydrogen and oxygen is very plentiful, which is really not that expensive, but it's not always necessarily the most efficient. So yeah, but I mean, I think from what I understand, really, when you're actually developing a system, obviously that's going to cost a hell of a lot of money. But so reusability really is only going to save money in the long term. And it's just like anything, it's economy of scale. Obviously, the more you're doing it in the long term, it's going to cost less, if you see what I mean, in terms of the economies of scale, not necessarily per thing. But I mean, SpaceX are already doing it, and they're actually already one of the most competitive commercial satellite launch companies in the market at the moment, and they're starting to corner more of the market on satellites because they're able to actually do it much, much cheaper. But of course, the profits are not necessarily showing that much because the amount of money they're actually spending on development. So yeah, I think it's more of a long-term thing. But I think eventually, when new technologies come along, and we can develop better engines, more efficient engines. Aerospike engines haven't been used yet. They're quite efficient, both at sea level and in a vacuum. So who knows? I think it could get very much cheaper. So we're definitely on the way to doing it, I think. Because it's like Elon says, if you don't really want to get on an airplane, you fly your airplane over to wherever you're going to go to and then throw it away.
No.
Right.
I mean, it sounds simple, but he's right. But we so many years since the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and all the rest of it, we just had this thing that the rockets are just thrown away because we haven't got the know-how to actually reuse them again. Is come to its fore now, and I think it's just going to get better. I think it will get to a point where people are going to afford to actually at least spend even a short time in space, even if it's a suborbital flight.
But Jim, if there was a space hotel there, would you go for a week stay?
I certainly would.
Yeah. So would I.
Absolutely.
I mean, I must admit, I'm more doubtful about the tourism thing. Yes, I know you've got the multimillionaires buying flights on Russian launches and so on. I can see there's always going to be a market for those very few people who have endlessly deep pockets. But for the average Joe, I just don't see it.
During our lifetime, I would agree with you, but in the future, I think.
Well, yeah, in the future. I guess probably commercial aircraft went through a period of many years before it was just routine for most people.
Yeah.
But a lot of the expense is the labor and development cost.
Yeah.
And if you're working on one thing and it's something totally new, you have hundreds or thousands of people, you have to pay them. They're on the payroll.
Yeah.
And you keep paying them, and you pay them until the thing is finished, and you may keep paying for them. The actual metal and parts are expensive too, but it's really the labor involved.
Yeah.
And reuse, that's, first of all, a system to return the pieces successfully in good condition, and then to certify some way that they are fit for human flight again is still a big problem. Yeah. I don't know that they've tackled that, but I tell you what, to see two of those boosters come back side by side and land, that was just amazing. I was very impressed with that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in now just to make a little announcement. Just due to the way things are, with other creators clashing, on Radical's channel, they're running a charity live stream. I don't know the guy it's in aid of, someone called Bacon God, and I don't know what the charitable need is, but I was asked if I would shout out, and I'm happy to. So it's on Radical, the Unhallowed Nights channel, and it's due to start in 2 minutes. So if anyone wants to or needs to go over there, more than understand. Right, I do have a question from someone whose name is unpronounceable, even though I tried the other night. Timo Manper. Sorry, Timo, you're going to have to teach me how to say it. Did you test any hard shell suits? And if so, what was your experience about them?
Well, no.
No, over there.
Except that we didn't test any. The upper part of the shuttle suit and the ones they're using on the ISS are hard. They call them a hard upper torso.
Yeah.
Made of fiberglass. No, I have seen people. There was another group of people who worked with developmental designs. That's where the hard shell suit would have been. And then there were those who wanted to make a suit that didn't have pressure but was elasticized to hold the tissues in at vacuum.
Yeah.
That didn't go far. But yes, those were other people. When we basically took a system that had been designed and manufactured up to whatever the contract called for. It was then turned over to NASA, and we had to certify that it would, without putting men in the system, we had to certify that it would keep a man alive. Once we were satisfied with that, we had to put somebody in there to see just how well it worked. And then eventually astronauts came to see what it would be like. And the folks who have been diving, I'm sure, went through training to become familiar with the scuba gear or whatever they were using, and had to practice jumping in a swimming pool, that sort of thing. So that's basically what we did, so that the astronauts could come into a situation that they felt was fairly safe, and that we could repressurize in an emergency. There were doctors standing by. The rescue techs could come get them. Even in the event that there was a fire, we could just practically fill the chamber with water. Then they could become accustomed to the suit and how it operated and feel safe enough so that when they had to do it outside the spacecraft, where they might not have rescue people or immediate repress, they didn't worry about the suit. They worried about other things, because the couple of times they came through the training runs with us gave them a little comfort in that the suit was going to work.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Right. I just had a message from Digital Demonic Davros with regard to that charity stream on Radical's channel. The Bacon God is also known as They and Them. So if that is a name that is more familiar to people. I've also had a super chat from Mr. John Rapp. He says, "Thanks so much, Jim. Those of us that have been into space travel, as in, a NASA fanboy, those of us that have been into space travel are living and imagining an interesting career through your experience. Absolutely fascinating.
Oh.
And Flurfs can go jump for denying." Thanks for that, John. Oh, that was $10 Australian.
As far as I know, they're still occasionally hiring people, both contractor and civil service. The last time I talked, I was at a retirement party of a guy who had worked there for 57 years.
Yeah.
From the time he was 19, and he was an intern. And he worked all this time. Okay, they said that the contractors and civil servants were basically working as if they were under the same badge now. The only difference is that contracts come and go, and the civil service goes on forever. The guy retiring after 57 years was civil service, by the way.
I just wondered if you could maybe clarify more than anything else for the people in the audience as well. The spacesuits you worked on were for the Gemini program, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I began work on June 10th of '63.
Yeah.
And that was 2 or 3 weeks after the final Mercury flight. There were still some Mercury suits around. And I think it was Prince Charles. Is that the Queen's husband? I'm sorry, I'm not up to
That's the Queen's son.
on.
Prince Philip is the Queen's husband.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Prince Philip was there. He toured when I was maybe in '64 or '65. And so they said, "Can anybody get into a Mercury suit, Jim? Are you about the right size?" And so they stuffed me into a Mercury suit. Can't stand up straight in it. There was no communications, and Prince Philip tried to talk to me when he came along the line and asked how comfortable it was. But they just had air, high pressure hose of air flushing through the suit to, flush out the CO2 and so forth. So he couldn't hear me, and I could barely hear him.
Yeah, Prince Philip had a very, very keen interest in, particularly in Apollo program and Gemini and stuff like that, as I understand it. Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, well, that would have been at the beginning of the Gemini program.
Yeah.
Jim, there's another one here. This person actually didn't leave their name because they posted the question in their name and in the question. What was Mr. Skipper's thoughts when he first heard of using planets and moons for gravitational assist slingshots to assist in trajectory to destinations instead of a straight shot from point A to B? P.S. Thoughts on UFOs? Asking for a friend.
I don't know orbital mechanics, but when I found out that you could do a slingshot around a planet, I thought, man, that is really amazing.
And of course, the grand
guys can come up with that.
Yeah, the grand tour when they realised they could go from one to
yes.
incredible.
Yeah,
yeah,
and they do it more often than I really thought they did, even for what you'd say simple things. And as far as UFOs, they're unidentified flying objects.
It could be just a plane.
Yep.
In a lot of cases.
It probably is.
Who knows?
Oh dear. Oh right, that was Trippin' Fuel. Trippin' Fool was the one.
I like the way you said asking for a friend.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, actually, I must admit, I think that's quite an interesting question. What does someone who was involved in NASA think of UFOs? So that's a fair enough question.
Well, yeah, it is.
So
I'm very skeptical of things.
But what do you think?
Really,
what do you think of things like the SETI program, then, Jim? The Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Do you think that's a total waste of time? It's something we may as well do, or do you think it's really important, or other?
It's something we may as well do. That's how I would categorize it. Mm-hmm. It's very unlikely, but you buy a lottery ticket. Some people do.
Yeah.
Because you have $1 and you might win. So I see that it's similar to that. You have a few extra dollars. Some people are interested. So give it a try. See what turns up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be agree with that.
I mean, the thing is, so if and I'm all for SETI, but if you get that signal that's a definite signal from extraterrestrial life, that's great. You've then proven that extraterrestrial life is in more than one place, or was. But we're never going to get a reply. We're never going to be able to reply and get an answer in our lifetimes anyway, are we? Really, unless it's somewhere incredibly near.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can speculate. What if they're just finding out that we're here and they want to come take over, or what if it totally disrupts our civilization
Just
to
knowing.
realize that that we're not the only ones. And
Well, it brings a whole new topic to our channels, Casual, because instead of fighting against flat earthers, we'll be having to argue the toss over whether we're about to be invaded.
I mean, it's a very interesting question to me because I mean, it's something that ever since I was a kid, I've always wondered about as well. And the more I learn about the universe, and the more that I've come to accept that somewhere, at least within the visible, the known universe, there has to be some kind of life, whether it's intelligent life or whether even if it is intelligent life, that the technology has advanced us or much more than advanced, that could communicate or travel great distances that we can't do. And there's so many different variables that we just don't know. But in my opinion, there has to be, even within the observable universe, with the literally billions of galaxies, let alone billions and trillions of star systems with each of those galaxies, that statistically there has to be some kind of life. But like I said, it's impossible to say how intelligent that life is. But for me, I'll be really excited if they do actually find even just microbial life on Mars.
I was just going to say exactly the same. I was going to say exactly the same, Casual. If they find one single-celled organism, that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Game over. We know there's life elsewhere in the universe. There has to be then. Yeah.
What do you think of that, Jim?
I agree with you. That's true. It's just one microbe or any kind of trace that shows that life had existed there.
Yeah.
I mean, I was saying in the stream this morning, I mean, with the probes and things that we've had sent to Mars so far, we have, quite literally only scratched the surface. And we do know that there was once flowing water on Mars. We do know that there was once an atmosphere of some kind. It's been stripped away. So, again, statistically speaking, you would think that there would be some kind of microbial life or single cell life there somewhere. So we've just got to dig a bit deeper and find it, wherever that might be.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably there somewhere, has to be.
Actually, Jim, I have a question for you, and it's concerning Mrs. Sensible, because we've often had. I have my own views, but I'd like to know yours. She thinks that the space program is a waste of money when there's so much good that could be done with that money here on Earth. What would you say about that?
That comes usually. That is. Am I cutting out?
No.
Okay. That typically comes up, and it's not just with the space program. I've heard many people say, for example, immigrants coming in. Why should we spend money for them when our veterans need money? The thing is, if we all get together on it, we could do all of it.
Yes.
Really, we could set some aside. And then the benefits of the space program, I have, of course, I've been a strong supporter of the space program. I worked with a guy who did not support the space program. He finally quit work and went to university, I think. So I think it's important just on its own.
Yes.
And the argument that a lot of inventions have come about that we use, and it's because of the space program, it may just be incidental things that would have eventually been developed anyway.
Teflon.
So, I hate to use that argument, but obviously, for example, Velcro. I believe Velcro had been invented before the space program, and it just fit in with what was needed. Someone do a search on Velcro and see if that's true. So anyway.
Right upside down.
Yeah, my wife mentions the ballpoint pen that can write upside down, underwater, 0G, and
but
the guy who
is that true though, Jim?
That,
is it true though, Jim, that the Russians came up with an alternative solution, a pencil?
Oh, you're right. And there's a problem with that that underwater writing pen or zero-G pen, it had a pressurized ink source, and you drop your pen and crack the tip just a little bit, stick the pen in your pocket, and the next thing you know, your pocket's full of ink. That was the one problem with it. But that guy kept pestering my supervisor at the time to put his pens in the chamber. He wanted to be able to say that they had been improved in a NASA chamber.
Yeah.
And this was in the early 60s when we could actually do that. After the Apollo fire, by the way, things changed, and they wanted documentation of everything that we were doing. Inspectors had to inspect all the work and verify that it was being done to the procedures or schematics, whatever.
Yes.
And very strict on the quantity of flammable material that could go inside the chamber.
It's understandable, isn't it?
Yeah. Can I respond to that as well, if I may? To respond to Mrs. Sensible, if
Please
that's
do.
okay. I mean, if you look at the kind of research that they've actually done on the ISS, an awful lot of medical research, things like stem cell regrowth, crystal regrowth, which is important in terms of various medicines and things like that, works a lot better in zero gravity or microgravity, I should say. Even research in osteoporosis, laser eye surgery.
I've had that.
Yeah, exactly. That was all developed, well, at least with research that was on the ISS. Even artificial limbs, some of the materials that they used, I believe, one of the programs, I'm not quite sure which, some of the materials were used in that for artificial limbs. And it just goes on and on and on. And even, domestic things like the little mini vacuum cleaners, that was developed for on the ISS.
Wow.
All kinds of different things. There's so many different things that have helped within the medical world, and also made our life so much easier. And that's just within the ISS. But as we know from all the space programs, including Apollo, all kinds of different things that technology that's developed has actually been used here on Earth to make our lives better and safer, and help us to live a bit longer, when it comes to medical research. So that would be my argument. However, having said that, I do understand why people would think that and say that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's quite a reasonable statement or question to actually make.
But I come from it. I mean, the UK space budget is pitiful, and yet I believe that whatever investment they make tends to pay back about 10 times. So it's not really a cost. Is it right, Jim, that the US budget now for space programs is about 2%, but it was 5% in the Apollo days?
It's less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Yeah. Less than 1%.
And yet the defence budget is, massive, isn't it?
Huge.
Yes, it's more than 50%. And just
So, I
on
mean,
that note, they decided in the 60s to lump our Social Security program, which is a big income stream that's supposed to go back out to those who need security. They count that as part of the budget, although it isn't even a part of the budget, to make the military percentage look smaller. That's how big it is. It's so big they wanted to disguise it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, you need a military budget, and I don't have a problem with that.
Oh yeah.
But you could easily shave a bit off and save more than the entire cost of the space program, and there's your money to spend. Because I don't think it should be. Look, do you spend it on space or do you do charitable stuff? No.
Right.
You can do both. And I mean, I get exactly what you mentioned, and you're saying, Casual, about the physical benefits like medicines and materials and so on. That's all great. My personal thing is, I'm a bit, I forgot what the word is, but I feel it's worth doing, like mountains, because it's there. And I also have a feeling we've had near-miss asteroids. There's obviously a dinosaur killer about 65 million years ago. Something like that will happen again. And if we can get to the point where we are self-sustaining on Mars or the Moon or wherever, then all the human race eggs are not in one basket. that's where I come from.
And if we continue with the space program the way we'd have to do to get to Mars, it'd probably just be a simple matter to deflect an asteroid, detect it. You got guys ready to go, and you go up and deflect it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about years in the future, but
yes. But if we don't start now,
right. Got to start now.
But then again, if you look at now that NASA are shifting over towards the commercial, they're using commercial companies with space exploration now. There's going to be definitely you're going to see more of a shift because those companies are looking at doing their own thing to get to Mars and go to the moon and space tourism and all the rest of it. So that money is going to be shifted away from tax dollars and going to be used for private enterprise. And for me, I don't have an issue with it because that in itself creates jobs anyway, and it's good for an economy wherever those companies are actually based in. So for me, I think commercial way is the good way forward. The only worry I have with commercial space exploration, and particularly when you're talking about moving humans into space, is that we've got to be really careful that profit isn't put before safety.
Yes.
We saw a huge mistake with NASA. Obviously, as we know, with Challenger, it was a sad fact that management were putting the mission before safety, and that's my opinion. And we lost some people with the Challenger disaster. But that would be my only worry. But in terms of sort of the costs for most people, I think in the future that's going to become less and less and less.
I saw a comment from someone, maybe I don't know who they were, on a video that said NASA would not let, and I don't even keep up with the names of these guys. Who has the Tesla car?
That's
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, yeah.
Musk. I believe they said NASA wouldn't let him put astronauts on his spaceship, and that's why we didn't have men back in space. Well, it's not a simple thing to say that a spacecraft is qualified for manned use, and if he wants to be part of the government program of ferrying astronauts to the space station or whatever he does, I guess he could put his own people in there. Maybe our FFA, I've gone blank on what the FFA is. It controls airplane flights and that sort of thing, space flights too. He might have to prove to them that it was safe to fly.
Yeah.
How about that Boeing 737?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the FFA was supposed to catch that. Okay, so they do try to.
But with that,
certification.
The private companies were self-certifying. That was the problem, wasn't it? To save money, it was taken away from the official government inspectorate and passed to the companies, and they signed off themselves.
Yeah, I don't know the details, but probably the FFA's budget had been cut. They didn't have people to go do it. Same thing happens in control of meat products and that sort of thing.
I don't know if you know, Jim, but NASA have contracted Boeing and also SpaceX to develop a spacecraft to actually take astronauts from American soil to transport them to the ISS. I don't know if you're aware of that. Boeing with their STS-100 or Starliner. And also SpaceX with their Dragon 2, and they're actually going through the process of the moment of getting them human rated or crew rated. SpaceX are quite close to it at the moment. They've got to do a launch abort test, I think, coming up in the next couple of months. Boeing are doing their first test without a crew next week, on Friday the 20th. So yeah, they're developing that at the moment. So it's to get away from from the Russian program. My mind's gone blank. I can't think what the program's called. Using their
It's a Vostok rocket.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and it's Soyuz spacecraft, I think.
That's the word. My mind just went completely blank for a second.
Yeah.
We're waffling on. That's why. To get away from, because they've obviously been using that since the shuttle program was shut down. We're getting pretty close to that at the moment. But again, like you were saying as well, whether they'll actually use their own people to get to the moon or get to Mars and all the rest of it, and I think they probably will. At some point, when that's going to happen, I don't really know. But as it stands at the moment, they're contracted to NASA to do that, at least to the ISS.
Well,
right,
Jim.
I was aware.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say a guy called Rogue T Cat said Jim mentioned that nobody remembers the Apollo-Soyuz mission. As it happens, that is one of my earliest TV news event memories. Has Jim got any memories of that mission?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. One is that I was supposed to be training a new test director, and he was going to conduct the emergency procedures. I stepped aside to watch how the rest of the team responded when the emergencies were called out. And this guy actually flipped on the fire suppression switch when he was supposed to just say, "I'm turning the fire switch on." Dumped water into the test article. And it came out of the chamber doors. I bet it was 6 inches deep, flowing out of that chamber. So yeah, I remember that. I actually have a copy of our procedure. We put the words on one side of the sheet so you didn't have to read the back. But someone had pasted the Russian translation of our procedure on the blank facing page of this document. I don't even remember how I got my hands on it, but it's in a box somewhere I saw recently. It was a neat project. It was in our very smallest chamber. It was in the same chamber where the guy lost suit pressure. And that chamber was originally a pilot's training chamber. And it was the first one that was installed in our lab back in 62, or I guess 62. So that's Apollo-Soyuz.
Yeah.
We got to visit with the Russian folks, and they gave us little souvenirs, and we gave them little souvenirs.
That's nice. It's quite amazing, even despite all the problems between the US and Russia, with the space program able to overcome those differences and work together. I remember the docking when they first met and handshakes in space and all that. Amazing.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'm too young then, but.
Right. Sure, Casual. Come on, rub it in.
1975, wasn't it, or something? When they docked.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would have been about 5. How old do you think I am?
I don't know. I'm only joshing.
I'm going to put you on the spot now. No, I'm joking.
Skip. They also Osvaldo Greco asks that. Sorry, I would like to hear about Jim's memories about Gus Grissom and Ed White. Well, any of the astronauts you've met.
Oh. Okay, I actually did something, and this would only be something that an engineer fresh out of school would come up with. Gus Grissom, I don't know if he had requested it or if somebody wanted it for his flight. He wanted fingertip lights on his gloves.
Okay.
And they wanted me to test these little wheat bulb, like a grain of wheat, little bitty lights back then. Before LEDs and all of that stuff. So I tried to make a light table. I bought a little light meter kit, and got a rail of aluminum and put the lights down at one point and tried to measure the light coming out of them. And the real test was for Grissom to come by, put the glove on, look in one of the facilities, I guess, and shine the lights. He said it was okay. It was okay. My test didn't really mean anything. So that was Grissom. I didn't know him personally.
Yeah.
I mentioned Jay Apt, who, well, I don't want to get into the background, but we had to work on analysis of, I think, a case where an astronaut fainted in a sea level type with air in the suit, or almost fainted. And that took weeks to try to sort out what had happened. And I worked with him during that time. So, and somewhere along the way, and I mentioned he was the one who wanted the things in the chamber with him to play with during his vacuum chamber run. And he signed a picture and sent it to me. Usually you have to go to a famous person and request a signature, and he just sent that one to me.
That's nice.
Bob Crippen was just a good old country boy.
And he's one of the three on that signed picture that they gave you.
Yes.
Yes, thanks for looking after us.
Right, that's where I first met him. And then he flew on the first shuttle flight with John Young. And I think he was the director of the Kennedy Space Center for a period of time. So I hope that gives some idea. And I will say that my fellow workers claimed that I assigned myself to every female astronaut's test.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm
sure it's not the case.
My wife says, yeah, I probably did.
Yeah.
And has she forgiven you yet?
Yeah, I think she has. For them, at least, not for some of the others. But she and I were taking a tour out in Arizona. We were at a box canyon. You climb up to one leg of this box canyon, walk around the end and back to the other side. Well, you could see across the canyon. Yeah. And we could see a guy and this was about 20 years maybe after that SMET test where Dr. Thornton was in, the guy in a baseball cap, and he was walking fast and caught up with us as we were going down, and it was Dr. Thornton. He and I hadn't spoken for 20 years, and here we're all out west hiking through a national park.
You just bump into him.
And yes, but the weird thing, he had flown out there and rented a car for a weekend and trying to go to every one of these parks that he could get to. He was an electrical engineer and a medical doctor, and I don't know what else. Maybe he was a lawyer, but he was a character, put it that way. Let me put in a plug for Kathy Sullivan, the first U.S. woman to do an EVA. And she was on the mission to launch the Hubble Space Telescope. That'll be 30 years ago this coming April, and she's writing a book. So look for her book.
Definitely.
Yeah.
She was in Houston, I think early this year, and invited me to come over to a coffee house and talk to her about the training runs. She'd kind of forgotten some of the details because she only did it one time, in her life. And that was an amazing. We sat in a Starbucks, which is kind of the exclusive coffee shop, for an hour, as if there was nobody else in there. We just talked and talked and talked. And she was. Under the Obama administration, she was the head of the NOAA, I believe, or some branch of it. I've forgotten which. So, any other astronauts you know of that I might know?
Jim, I just wanted to check my knowledge, actually, and this might be a little bit of interesting trivia. You mentioned about the first space shuttle launch. And as I understand it, I'm checking my knowledge. I could be wrong about this, but as I understand it, on the first shuttle launch, there was only 2 astronauts, so they actually had an ejection seat system I believe, in case of emergency during launch or during the shuttle's descent again. Is that correct? Am I right?
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
I don't know the details of that, but yeah,
no,
that's what I remember too.
I do remember watching that
Well, let me
first
give
shuttle.
you another little detail about that. They were concerned that once the cargo bay doors were opened, they might not be able to close them for some reason. So they had tools and winches and cables and pulleys so a guy could get in a spacesuit and go out there and hook up all the cables and winch the doors shut.
Wow.
So both Crippen and Young practiced in the suits of these tests that I've been describing. Now, they didn't have to do that, came back, unloaded the spacesuits and brought them back to our division. Our division chief said, let's run this suit, one of them, and show that it would have worked if they had needed to use it. It was a great, and I've forgotten the name of the astronaut who got in the suit, but the battery was dead.
Oh.
So, yeah. So we weren't able to get the vacuum because of a dead battery, and that was, I wouldn't want to go through that again. That was a mess.
I do find it quite extraordinary, though, that if they had to eject, particularly at subsonic speeds, obviously there would be a point where they wouldn't be able to eject. But I can imagine that the forces on the body, even if they were in a solid ejection seat, would be exceptionally harsh, I should imagine, wouldn't it? And I find it incredible. I can understand, fighter jets quite often as well would do, but even with the space shuttle, particularly when it gets to max Q and beyond, that they would have to eject. I find that actually extraordinary. I don't know what you think about it, and I find it extraordinary that they would even be able to survive it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It may have just been there to make people feel better.
Yeah.
I just saw a video, I think, of the history guy talking about one of the big super bombers that were built, maybe an SB-70 or something, that had escape modules. And if you pulled the escape lever, whatever, you were slammed back into a module, and then a door closed on it and ejected you.
Wow.
Well, the thing was hit by a chase plane, hit one of the wings and put it into a spin. The chase plane crashed, killed that guy. And the fella, one of the guys successfully got into the module. I think he survived. I'm not sure. Because I believe they said the last he saw is that the other module was, the guy, because the G-forces couldn't be pulled back into his module and it blew out anyway, I guess with part of him. So, yeah, it's, it can be tricky.
Well, Jim, a change of pace here.
Okay.
From Super Dave Osborne. He asks, what is your funniest memory of the space program? Were the guys all playing tricks on each other all the time, or was it much too serious for that?
When it was serious, yeah, the guys would play tricks on each other. It's common to fellows working in a warehouse or whatever. You put a pan of water on the ceiling, hold it up with a broom, and say, "Hey, hold this for a minute. I've got to go," and you leave them. That sort of thing. Yeah, it's just guys doing stuff like that. Maybe the one with the worst consequences was, and they had hired someone who was, he could sweep the floors, and clean up, empty the trash, but that was about all he was qualified for. And the guys would give him a rough time. And then there were the very gullible people that fellas wanted to make fun of. They gave one of them, I believe it was some actual dust that was being used to simulate lunar dust.
Yeah.
And they had a little vial of that dust and said, hey, we're letting people have moon dust. And he called home and said he had moon dust, and they put it in their local paper, and the FBI came. And of course, the guys got chewed out. The Thanksgiving turkey was a perennial deal. I don't know how they thought it up, but the contractors would tell all the new guys, well, did you get your Thanksgiving turkey? What? Thanksgiving turkey? Yeah. Well, maybe you ought to go ask the boss about, maybe they forgot you. And they did that enough that this poor boss could tell when someone came in at Thanksgiving time, a new hire, that it was somebody else looking for his Thanksgiving turkey. But they had nothing to do with the space program at all.
No.
Does your friend know that they didn't get one? Does he know that they didn't actually?
Yes, nobody got a Thanksgiving
No.
turkey. It was the joke.
Does Mrs. Skipper want to say hello?
Well, you want to say hello?
Hello, Mr.
Sensible.
Hello, Mrs. Skipper.
He said hello. I think you heard that. Oh, I forget that I'm the only one hearing this.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go on, carry on, Jim.
Yeah, we may be getting way off track, but we did have one sort of problem with astronaut communication, because the spacesuit had two modes of communicating. One made everybody, all the incoming signals, hot all the time, so you could hear every noise coming in. Or you could switch it, and then only when the audio level would trigger the system could the astronaut hear it. And many people have a tendency to start with a very loud voice and then they kind of fade away. So our other people were just low on the comm loop. And I guess we got the idea across to most of the astronauts, if they were in that audio triggering mode, that if they didn't hear me talking, if I didn't say something to them, it didn't involve them and they didn't have to worry about it. Okay, it was just one of the things we ran into.
So that would be a squelch level, is that right?
Yeah, I guess you would call it that. Yeah. I don't know what else. Yeah. Maybe that's the actual term for it.
Well, I remember from CB radio, you could adjust that, the squelch, and anything that was a lower signal, you'd get silence. Goes above, and then it'll come straight through.
Right.
Yeah, I had a CB radio, and I never knew what that actually was for.
Well, now you do, Casual.
Bit late now, though.
So thanks to NASA's space program, we've ended up with Jim, and you've learnt how to use a CB. So there's a benefit.
Yeah.
It's a shame no one else is using CB, but there we go.
Yeah, it's a long time ago now. It's just 2 days ago.
Right, let's see if we've got any questions here. Let's see.
Can I just ask you before you do, Mr. Sensible, Jim, have you? I don't know if you've actually seen the new design for the Artemis spacesuits. Have you seen those?
And actually, I think that involves this very question I'm looking at here from Colon, which is: did James have anything to do with the early development of the new suits that will take the astronauts back to the moon in 2024? Or was that all before you, sort of after you retired, Jim?
Well, I think that has been after I retired. I have seen I think there was something in the news and video showing the demonstration of the new suit.
I've missed it.
Is it called?
I think that's what you're talking about, Casual.
Yeah, that's Project Artemis. That's right. Yeah.
Was that in the news just in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it would have been about a month or so ago. Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what, just for the benefit of the audience, and I'll share something that I found a little while ago. Just gives you just like an image of the suits. They've got the flight suit and the EXMU as they call it. I can't quite remember what it stands for, but I don't know if you can actually see that.
What I'll do is I'll maximise you.
Yeah.
So that's as big as I can get it. It'll come through in a second.
There you go. I don't know if you can see that.
Right.
Yeah.
The one on the left would be the actual EVA suit.
Yeah, correct.
The red one would be used in the spacecraft, I guess.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, basically the suit they've actually improved is obviously is the dexterity and the movement much better. They're saying now that the astronaut on the surface of the moon would actually be able to walk, as opposed to with the Apollo program, as you know, they had to sort of hop very much, and also they can actually bend. Still a little bit difficult, but they demonstrated it on the video at the time when Jim Bridenstine was demonstrating it, and they could actually bend down and pick up rocks. And also they can move their arms much better freedom movement of their arms, and also the communication is slightly different. The communication is actually built into the suit itself rather than the skull caps that they would have had.
But it's quite interesting. It's still a top half and bottom half, rather than step in through the back.
Yeah, and as you can see with the EVA suit, you can see that band in the middle that gives them a much better movement, to turn on the hips as well. So yeah, the whole idea was really just to try and vastly improve the mobility, which they've looks like they've actually managed to achieve. I'm not sure whether it's 100% developed yet, but I think they're very close to it. I think they've got a few issues to iron out and things like that, but they're pretty much close to rolling it out. I don't think there was anything particularly extraordinary about what I call the flight suit, or I don't know if you call that the same, Jim. Would you call that a flight suit or survival suit? Yeah. Apparently they can pressurize it, and they can actually potentially live in the flight suit for up to 6 days. It's designed for 6 days usage in a survival situation if there was decompression.
Yeah, be careful. We're going to get talking about lavatories again now, aren't we?
So that's a new they're developing at the moment.
Wow.
The thing I noticed in the Artemis suit is that metal band apparently combines the waist bearing with the latching mechanism between the upper half and the lower half. In the current shuttle suit, there's kind of a fabric section between those, I believe, from what I remember.
Yeah.
And they've managed to improve the feeling apparently in the gloves as well, which are much better. So they've got a lot more dexterity with the fingers apparently as well. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The gloves are one of the toughest things. But that reminds me of I mentioned Jay Apt, the astronaut. He did an EVA, and they have a palm restraint. There's a metal band that curves into the palm of the glove, and it's adjusted with a strap on the back of the glove. And somehow that metal restraint is like a big paper clip, maybe, punctured the inner lining of the glove. It came loose from the restraint somehow and poked J. Apt's the base of his index finger, made a little sore, and a little tiny flap of that inner liner. It didn't punch it out like a hole punch would do, but like you might imagine poking a paper clip through a balloon, it just tore a little flap there.
Yeah.
He survived. Didn't even notice it probably. So gloves are difficult. If you blow up a glove, rubber glove or whatever, it looks like a ball instead of a hand, and that's one of the big problems.
Because of course, the more you put
gloves,
the more you put a material that doesn't expand like that, the less mobility you're going to have.
Right. Yep.
Another question as well that you just suddenly popped into my head as well, Jim. That earlier on, when you said that you pressurized the suits after the initial 1 psi, then increased it up to 4.7, and you said it would never have been above 5. What would be the reason for it not being above 5 psi?
Overpressure relief. The suit had a relief valve to prevent that. It can get up to that value during the depress, and in fact, it actually does. That's how the pressure is relieved during an airlock depress. Now, I didn't go through the whole thing, and it really didn't come up with the answer, probably, of how the CO2 gets absorbed in lithium hydroxide. And then when you turn the oxygen back on, of course, and it needs to make up a little pressure, it provides oxygen, and the CO2 is absorbed and makes kind of a cycle. Well, it's not a cycle. It comes from the oxygen tank, goes into the lithium hydroxide.
Okay. What was the pressure generally during flight with the say with the Gemini spacecraft? What was the pressure environment in there?
Maybe 3.75.
Okay. I'm just curious. I'm not really not au far with the science behind it. So why not pressurize the spacecraft to 1 atmosphere, or would that have been created too much pressure on the structure of the aircraft of the spacecraft?
Yeah, that's it. And I've read that the Russians, well, first of all, they had bigger boosters because they needed to launch bigger bombs. They didn't have miniature bombs like the U.S. had. And so they had to develop big boosters. They also knew how to make submarines. So they worked more on the principle of we're going to make a submarine. I think some of the early spacecraft actually had a periscope for viewing outside. So they were built to withstand 14.7.
Okay.
The Russian capsules. And we went lightweight, and just strong enough to take 5 psi, D.
Okay, yeah. So simple as that. Just keep it lightweight. So therefore, lower pressure. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Simple as that. Okay.
Well, Andrew Stoll, I think he asked a question earlier on. He's also asked if you've gone and watched a SpaceX launch.
Have I?
Yeah. I think we spoke about launches when we talked on Sunday, didn't we?
Yes. The only launch I've seen is one of the later Apollo launches.
Which got to be.
I live a long way from those launch sites.
But that's got to be one of the most impressive ones, anyway, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has.
I mean, I just can't picture the size of those things.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's my dream to see any launch live. If I can do that, I will be one of the things that would make me die a happy man, to be honest, amongst a lot of other things. But yeah, that would be my dream. See any launch, I don't care.
Actually, it isn't that far from us. Down to Brownsville, it would be a relatively easy drive to go. I've forgotten who's launching at Brownsville, but I do read the news. I just get them mixed up nowadays as to which was Musk and
there's
Bezos.
Virgin Galactic.
No, that's Blue Origin. Is Bezos. Blue Origin.
Okay, who's in South Texas?
That would be Blue Origin. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I could go down there and watch that.
Yeah, you could do. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how close you can get to them, but yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to. Yeah, like I said, any launch will do. I mean, I do remember. I think I was probably about 7 or 8 years of age, and my father. We were at some family do with the military, and there was a number of Americans on the base for whatever reason. I don't know what they were doing there, and I was introduced to a guy that I think has something to do with the Air Force. I'm not quite sure what his job was, and he was introduced to me through my father, because he apparently witnessed, I think it was the Apollo 12 launch, and he was apparently as close as most people could actually get, and he very much, and I remember his words, he described it that as it lifted off, the noise, it literally made his body vibrate inside. He said his chest vibrated. So I can kind of understand, with the Saturn V, the kind of power behind it and the noise that it would have created, even with the water deluge system. And I would love to kind of experience that. I really, really would. So, and I do. I remember that guy's face, and I remember his words very, very clearly, like it happened today, even though it was a few years ago.
Yeah, because Jim, you, I can't remember how far, but you told me how far you were from the actual launch vehicle.
I think it was 5 miles, 3 to 5, and yeah, we could feel the vibration. Let me ask my son if he remembers. He was very young. You remember that? Feeling the vibration all the way out there? Yeah. He remembers that.
Yeah.
He was maybe 10 years old about that time.
Well, that's pretty impressive thing to have gone to.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people appreciate the power of the Saturn V. It's the biggest, most powerful rocket that's ever launched so far. It's probably going to be, that buckle's going to be broken pretty soon, I think. But extraordinary machine, extraordinary.
Well, let's see if we got any more questions coming. I think, and I hope this one's a little tongue-in-cheek. Mr. Skipper's thoughts on the so-called secret space program and secret bases on the Moon and Mars. We have apps that will notify us of pretty much every rocket launch around the world. Do you think there's anything underhand? I mean, I presume that there must be secret launches, or I suppose the launch isn't secret, but the payload is secret with spy satellites and whatever. Do you think there's any sort of conspiracy there at all, Jim?
Well, there's no conspiracy, but we did have one funny thing. We're talking about training. My job and our group was to have the facilities ready to train astronauts so that they were familiar with the EMU. We had 2 things they were supposed to do. One, in one chamber, they walked on a treadmill, pushed the push bar, and they generated sweat and let the system cool and got experience with that. Once they completed that, they'd get into a facility that basically looked like the shuttle airlock. And they normally did that about 6 weeks before flight. On one of we had done that for the 2 EVA crew members assigned for the flight. I don't remember which one. And then just maybe 2 weeks before launch, Ellison Onizuka was sent over, and they said he had to go through the airlock training to get familiar with using the EMU. So he became a 3rd crew member on that flight, qualified to do an EVA. And just, at the last minute, just doing that one training run. And we thought that was kind of unusual, but, we didn't have a need to know, so we didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, what his mission was. They talked about it was something to do with Air Force and probably secret.
Yeah, of course.
Why they needed an extra guy trained, I have no idea.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's going to be missions like that. There's bound to be. Bound to be.
I mean, I've never, they also mentioned about these secret moon bases. I mean, there's no evidence at all to suggest. There's no citation. There's nobody actually said that there are moon bases that have actually seen or orbited the moon or landed on the moon. No, sorry, but. Not buying it.
I talked over you there, I guess. But the ironic thing is, there's one group that says there's secret missions and secret bases, other people say we've never been to the moon. You know,
Yes.
You can't have it both ways.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, Jim, your we heard. Oh, are you back again? You're back again. Good.
I'm back again.
Good. Good.
Yeah, it is. That's what I was using for holding the smartphone.
Oh. Tom C. Tutor asks if you know anything about the radiation proofing requirements of the earlier spacesuits.
I don't think there is much in the spacesuit itself.
Yeah.
That's an uninformed answer. There might have been a little bit. They counted on getting the Apollo capsules through that Van Allen belt
Pretty quick.
as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And they did an EVA on the way to the moon to change something in the back. I forgot. I don't know if it's film canisters or what. And this is just a guess that they didn't do that EVA while they were in the Van Allen belt.
But my understanding is that even so, of course, there was radiation, but they're talking about roughly equivalent to the radiation somebody who works in a nuclear plant would receive every year. So you don't want it, but the amount they received wasn't lethal in itself. Well, obviously, because they didn't just die as soon as they came back.
Right. And I think they have followed up enough with the guys who flew to show that there was no long-term effect anyway.
Yeah.
I was actually, because I had been going through the physicals every year or on the job, they had me continue after I retired to compare me with an equivalent astronaut who had been in orbit.
Okay.
And eventually the money ran out on that, so I stopped getting free annual physicals.
It's one of the little benefits, or was, I guess. Let's see what else we got. We've had a constant supply of questions coming in.
Talking about the radiation, the doses, the doses they actually received, exactly what you said, are actually available online. Now, I did have a copy of a document. It was an official NASA document, which recorded the average doses of each astronaut all the way from Apollo 11 right through to Apollo 17. So it's no big secret, because they actually had the devices that measured the amount of radiation, not only on the actual astronauts' persons themselves.
They're called dosimeters. Is that right? Dosimeters?
That's right, yeah. Both on the astronauts and actually on the command module and on the limb and all the rest of it as well, all over the spacecraft. And it was, the thing to remember is that they did two things. The inclination of when they actually translunar injection, when they went from orbiting the Earth to the Moon, was such an angle where they went through the thinner part of the Van Allen belts.
Yeah.
Not only that, but to use a term, they were hauling ass. They were going really fast.
Yeah.
So they were literally both there and back. They were only actually in even the least dangerous parts of the Van Allen belts for a few hours at the very, very most. So it's nothing extraordinary, you know. The space, you know, these moon hoaxers seem to think that it was impossible to actually do, because there's been a few people have said recently that we haven't got the technology, we can't get through the radiation belt. But what they seem to forget, the technology that we had in 1969 to 72 is very different to the technology they have now, which could react to radiation. Not particularly worried about how much radiation the astronauts are going to do, because we can still get through that. So they're using that as a kind of like to say, oh, well, if we can't get through it now, we couldn't in 1969.
Not understanding all the microprocessors and so on we've got now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was different type of technology that could cope with that. And also, don't forget, there's different types of radiation, and there's certain types of radiation you can block with a piece of paper.
Yes.
Their most dangerous, I believe, is the gamma radiation, unless I'm mistaken. But again, they received very, very low doses of that, so wasn't an issue. And also, bearing in mind, we actually knew about the Van Allen belt many, many years before even the Gemini program began. So they knew all about it. They knew what kind of levels of radiation there was. Unless I'm mistaken, Jim, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong in that. They launched some probes into the Van Allen belts and measured the radiation. So they knew that a long, long time before even Gemini took off, as far as I know.
I think I remember references to the Van Allen belt in the mid-50s when I was a teenager.
Yeah. So, they're well prepared for it, well prepared a long, long time before. Long time before Apollo before we actually got out of low Earth orbit, in Apollo 8.
But let's face it, those guys were willing to take the risk anyway. Yeah. The brave guys. Incredibly brave guys. They had no idea. I mean, up until then, they didn't even know that that they wouldn't sink into the surface in feet and feet of dust. It just wasn't known, was it?
I mean, but don't forget, you've got to bear in mind as well is that a lot of those astronauts, apart from Cernan, who was a geologist, I believe, on Apollo 17, they were pretty much all military or test pilots or both. So like Buzz Aldrin was saying on an interview once before as well, was that he'd actually been on missions with the military that were far more dangerous than he did on Apollo 11. So they accepted risks and they made calculated risks to actually do whatever they did. So it was nothing really extraordinary to most of them. Only going by what they've actually been saying in interviews and things like that in the books I've read.
Well, Jim,
they were willing to take a calculated risk. They didn't want some dummies pulling something that would hurt them. That's the big thing with them.
Yeah,
they were willing to do a calculated risk on a system that was shown to be workable, as long as some dummy didn't come along and mess it up.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Sensible, over to you.
Well, I was just going to say, since we're talking about Apollo, Globus Schillis has asked, on Apollo 13, how was the mood in the operations centre? Was the movie doing it justice? And I guess you weren't in operations, but obviously you were in NASA. So how was the whole thing? Because you had some involvement with that, I believe.
I did have involvement with it. It wasn't exactly like the movie, but I think the movie was a good representation of it. To be honest, I didn't think the problem was we weren't told how bad the problem was. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. And
the things that I had heard that were going wrong didn't seem like a major problem to me, but they really were. Our division chief claimed that he came up with the idea of rigging up the lithium hydroxide canisters I was talking about to remove the CO2.
Same technology.
From the LEM and Apollo capsules have different canisters, so they couldn't swap them physically, but they rigged up a way to get the suit hose connected to a loose canister, and I guess it must have been the LEM, the power that was used in the LEM system was circulating the spacecraft atmosphere through that canister, through probably an Apollo. No, well, okay, I don't remember the details.
Okay.
But we had a LEM ECS system in one end of the chamber. We had been doing lunar EVA simulations in there, where the astronauts would be connected to the LEM system, would pump they'd open a relief valve to depress their cabin, open our airlock door, and switch to internal supplies. The Apollo suit wouldn't operate on its own at ambient pressure. You had to have it depressed to a lower pressure before it would work. So you had a facility system that was connected to another set of suit hose connections. Okay, so we used that system to show that the rig that our division chief proposed, using things that they knew were in the Apollo and the LEM, and it would still remove the CO2.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we did. Ken Mattingly, someone at the table covered with parts in the movie, that was supposed to be Ken Mattingly, who had been exposed to the mumps, was it? Something.
Yeah. Yes.
Before the flight.
Or measles.
And was scrubbed out of that. Measles. Yeah, measles.
But he never did get the measles, did he?
No.
No, he didn't. And he did get to fly later. But I don't think there was ever a table full of stuff and someone sorting through trying to figure out what to use.
They're going to use artistic license, but the story, the story's basically holds true.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just for those that maybe not, I mean, I'm sure most people have seen Apollo 13, but what happened with for those that not in the know, by the way, with Apollo 13 was that after they took the burn to actually go to the moon, one of the astronauts was asked to press a button to stir the cryo tanks, which is I'm not quite sure what tanks were actually used.
It was an O2 tank, wasn't it?
O2 tanks, I believe. And apparently there was...
I think, let me add, they were used for power. I think they were
that's right.
Combining oxygen and hydrogen.
Oh, for the fuel cells.
Hydrazine?
Yeah, fuel cells.
Is that hydrazine? Or is that something else?
No, not hydrazine.
That hydrazine is a fuel, isn't it? But that's highly toxic, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Carry on, Casual.
Yeah. So so what happened was there was a short circuit. Cutting a long story short, there was an explosion. The problem was it took out a lot of the power for the command module. From the service module, which was the part that provided the power, and of course that caused a kind of a chain reaction of all sorts of different things in terms of life support and the problem that you were talking about as well. So what they had to do was then use a system called a free return trajectory. So they actually carried on to the moon, orbited the moon, and did a burn, and then came back to Earth, which obviously took time. But of course, while this is happening, they having all these different problems with power and also obviously, like you said, the problem that you were involved with, there was the carbon monoxide was building in the LEM and the command module. And I believe they used the LEM as a kind of like a lifeboat, didn't they?
Yeah.
As I understand it, Jim, would that be right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was the term they used, and I'd have to do the research on it to remember.
Yeah.
Which system provided the flow? I guess the LEM did. That's why they called it the lifeboat.
Yeah, I just thought.
That oxygen tank. I've read the report somewhere. The oxygen tank was actually damaged after it was constructed, but it was dropped and apparently knocked a vent tube inside, knocked it loose. I don't remember all the details. They ran it through some tests and found that the only problem was that it was a little hard to fill it with oxygen. And it was some deal. They said, well, that's not bad enough to scrub the tank out of the system. And so they let it pass, and it went on through, and that damage from the fall is what led to the explosion.
Ah, okay, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, brilliant.
So, because it can be the smallest thing. It's the same with the Hubble, wasn't it? The Hubble Space Telescope. Once they got it up, they took those first images, and they were as blurry as anything. And my understanding is, when they ground the mirror several years before, there'd been a speck of paint under one of the mounts for the mirror blank, so it wasn't quite right. And then, of course, they applied basically corrective lenses to it, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
With the Hubble repair mission.
I was under the impression that apparently they ground the mirror to the not quite the right dimensions. Apparently, there was some like by one decimal point.
It was minuscule, absolutely minuscule.
Yeah, but it made it
Right.
as far as that's as I understood it. Again, I could be wrong.
I mean, I remember all that, and we were talking about the first shuttle launch. I remember watching that when it returned, and they used the high powered scopes to spot it, and it was just this bright glowing dot. And then as it came down, you could see the glowing along the nose and the leading edges of the wings. Absolutely astonishing. And then finally seeing it on the runway, what an incredible thing that was.
Yes, it was.
Did you mention that the first female American EVA was at the Hubble launch, wasn't it? Is that right, Jim?
No, I think her first EVA. Yeah, she actually didn't go EVA on the Hubble launch because it launched well. Her EVA was before that.
Oh, okay. I misheard you. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know that I've looked that up, but let's see. When she did that first EVA, she flew with maybe Sally Ride. Folks, do your Googling out there and see which mission that was.
Yeah, somebody did that.
So if that mission had flown soon enough, we would have had a first woman to go back into space 2 times. And first woman to do an EVA. Well, right before that mission, that shuttle mission, the Russians launched their first woman. She hadn't even been active for like 20 years. And she did an EVA. So she became the first woman to fly into space twice and the first woman to do an EVA. And Kathy Sullivan, I asked her, I said, well, we hated that you weren't the first. And she said, yeah, if the U.S. wasn't so open with what we were doing, they couldn't beat us to the record.
I guess that perhaps the Russians were more willing to take risks just to get that record. Do you feel that's the case?
I don't know that it was really a risk for them. I know that they have, speaking of hoax stuff, I can remember when one of the leading magazines like here, Popular Mechanics or Mechanics Illustrated magazine said that the first Russian EVA was a hoax. And they had photographic evidence, the fact that you couldn't see the feet of the suit, that it was staged. It's like the hoax guys that you see today.
Yeah.
That was in Mechanics Illustrated back in whenever
they
early
couldn't stand
60s.
the fact that the Russians had done something first.
Right.
And yet, of course, with all these things, like if the Apollo moonshot had been faked, what a perfect opportunity the Russians would have had to totally embarrass the US.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Yeah. Absolutely. But the answer to a lot of these conspiracy theories is that apparently that the Russians were in on the conspiracy as well, which is extraordinary because if you think about the number of people that would have been involved in such a huge hoax, literally between the United States and the Russians and a number of other people that were involved, like Australia and oh God, I mean, it was incredible, and sometimes we can't even keep governments can't even keep the smallest secrets
Yes.
away from the public, which I won't mention.
Or some of the most embarrassing secrets as well.
Yeah, exactly. Clinton.
Yes.
Say no more. I just find it extraordinary, and it's quite strange because there hasn't been not one single person that is in the conspiracy that's come forward as a whistleblower in all those 50 years.
Imagine how much they could make.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. Hey.
Yeah.
Maybe you should do it, Jim. Go on.
Tell us the truth.
Yeah.
Tell us the truth.
Was Stanley Kubrick behind the moonshot filming?
Well, I told you that some of them claimed that he saw the video of my buddy Jim LeBlanc lose his suit pressure and fall over. He knew that he survived for 14, 20 seconds maybe at vacuum. And so he felt justified in putting that scene in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where the guy had to jump across from his little
from the pod
module.
From the pod.
Yeah, the pod into the airlock, and still had enough time and consciousness to grab the handle and repress the airlock.
So that was his scientific basis for that.
That's what it could have been. Speculation, but that he did that. But anyway, we enjoyed the idea that it might have been part of the movie.
But the thing is, I mean, like when you look at, I mean, that was one of Stan Kubrick's best work. But then if you look at the scene when their astronauts were walking on the moon, shall we say it wasn't particularly convincing. And they're using the excuse that they used Stanley Kubrick to fake the whole thing. Again, is another thing that I find extraordinary. I really do. I just can't understand how people can draw their conclusions. And I think mostly as well, it comes down to knowledge. And once you understand what the processes we actually went through from Gemini through to Mercury to Apollo, and all the missions involved, and in developing all the technology that's come to that point, then people would probably understand a little bit more. And it's not taught in schools really. The stuff that I learned, I didn't learn at school. I learned because I was interested in it as a young kid, and I just read lots of books, starting from children's books about rockets and things like that, and read lots of books from astronauts and engineers and things like that. And you just learn and you understand and just gain knowledge. So if more people did that, I think there would be less people that would believe in the conspiracies.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who don't understand a lot of things, and I think it's sad that people are so willing to think the worst of everyone. Sure, governments can be bad and so on, but the amazing technology. I mean, you see film of these rockets, and then it's one thing to say that it's hoaxed in some ways, but when you see these stupid hoax ideas like the shuttle's main fuel external tank is a helium-filled balloon. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's not in the slightest it's not feasible in any way, shape, or form. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Have you? I don't know if you've heard, Jim, as well, about the what he's talking about is the space shuttle. People think that big orange tank is a helium-filled blimp. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I've seen at least one debunking video on that. Yeah, it's a total lack of understanding or having any concept of what's going on with it. Some said there was no way to get that much fuel out of the tanks. Someone on one of the videos, but the pumps for the oxygen and hydrogen are monster pumps.
I understand. I understand that they can empty an Olympic-sized swimming pool in about 20 seconds. It's something ridiculous like that. Does that sound right to you, Casual?
Yeah, probably not far off that. Might be a slight exaggeration, but you're not far off it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's just stunning.
I'm not really sure of how much effect. I don't know if they could drain by gravity. I don't know if it's set up. I think they pump out the bottom of the tank so that gravity helps, and the fact that it's accelerating upward at a tremendous acceleration, all of that helps force the liquids down toward the inlets to the pump to start with, and they're just some amazing pumps.
And I was doing a little, actually, funny enough, I was doing a bit of research this morning, and because somebody was talking about this blimp issue, and I think it was Blue Marble Science actually did a debunk on it. And I was doing a bit of research, and the connectors between the main engines on the orbiter and the fuel tank, the connectors are 17.5-inch diameter. Huge things.
The fuel lines.
Yeah, the fuel
right?
lines to connect to the main hydrogen and oxygen tanks. 17.5 inches in diameter. Huge. So they obviously needed that kind of diameter of connector and pipes to go to that, to do that. So you could kind of get an idea how much hydrogen and how much oxygen was going through at that rate. It must have been an extraordinary amount. So yeah, what Mr. Sensible was saying, emptying an Olympic-sized swimming pool in 30 seconds or whatever.
Well, I've just done a quick Google. Not quite right. It says, as they push the shuttle towards orbit, the engines consume liquid fuel at a rate that would drain an average family swimming pool in under 25 seconds, generating 37 million horsepower. And the turbines spin almost 13 times as fast as an automobile engine spins when it's running at highway speed. That's just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
I knew swimming pools came in it somewhere. Useless facts stored up here somewhere.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's have a look, see if we've got any more questions. If you're still all right to go, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another 20 or 30 minutes, maybe.
All right. And when I do wrap up, could I ask that you just stay on the conference just for 5 minutes afterwards? I'll explain after.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Right, so Captain Phobos asks, for missions, especially Moon and Mars, what do you think is most important? Physical resilience, intellectual, or emotional resilience? Did you get into the psychological side of things at all, or purely the physics of the testing stuff?
I think the psychological part, and yeah, I think most of the folks who would try for something like that would be physically fit.
Yeah.
What was the other?
Physical, intellectual, or emotional?
Okay, I don't think you'd have to be that smart, but you got to be smarter than the average guy, probably.
Yes.
So I think the emotional thing is a problem.
Yeah.
This is a different test. It's on my website where they wanted to put regenerable CO2. CO2 was a big thing.
Yeah.
In the Columbia, the lithium hydroxide would absorb the CO2. You'd switch to a fresh bank, while the bank that had just absorbed the CO2 would be heated slightly and exposed to vacuum. Cycle back and forth. And that was for the shuttle cabin environmental control system. So we ran a test. We had, I believe it was 7 people for 8 days or 8 people for 7 days, I've forgotten. And then we switched out. My boss wouldn't let us put men and women together, so we did women one week and the men the next week. And to keep those folks happy was probably the most difficult part of that test. And that's just my informal feeling. I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, but I could tell that they did not all get along well for that week confined inside a shuttle cabin volume.
But I guess that any issues they did have, they're going to try their darndest to keep under wraps for fear of not being picked.
Yes, both. And while they were in there, we didn't want them to drop out once they were inside.
Yeah.
My son was in with the men, one of my sons, and he said they finally had to show one guy how to kind of bathe himself. We didn't have very good bathing facilities in there. And
yeah.
Show him that you could do a sponge bath. And the women adopted one of their own to be kind of their mother, and she was in charge. We didn't, at least I didn't know how to select somebody or that they even needed someone to be in charge, but they did that on their own.
Yes.
So emotional, I think, is a big thing.
Because I mean, it's just the idea. I mean, Mars. What is it? 18 months to get there? Is that right, Casual? Would it be an 18-month transfer from Earth orbit to Mars? I think Casual might have frozen.
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm not sure. Yeah. I believe that might be a little bit long.
Less. Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it's a long time. It's certainly longer than a week.
Yes. So
we had these folks in the chamber.
So you've got that all the way to Mars, however long you're on Mars, and if you're coming back, you've got that great long trip again, just basically in a tin can, pressed up against lots of other people. And if you can't get along with people, or I mean, you could just imagine how someone's habits will start to grate on you.
Yes, they should be considering that, obviously, on the ISS, where some of the guys are up there for a year.
And obviously they've managed to either pick the right people or overcome it in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the idea of being locked in an airliner with someone you don't get on with for a year.
I'm sure we can all imagine a situation like that.
Yes.
And who we might want to be in with and who we wouldn't want to be in with.
So that's why you were choosing all the female astronauts, was it, Jim?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, I've felt more at ease with them, I think.
Actually, all joking aside, I do relate to that. I would find that easier as well. Tom C. Tutor has asked, when do you think that man is likely to settle on Mars, and what are the risks?
I'm not sure. There's so many risks that it would be hard to list all of them. And I don't much think it will be in my lifetime. So, that's like the next 10 or 15 years.
Oh, more than that, I hope,
so
Jim.
There's what?
More than that, I hope.
Well, I hope so too. I'd like to see a mission to Mars.
Me too.
But so much is involved in just getting there in the first place and landing successfully, and then you got to stay in your spacecraft. There's nowhere else to go, at least initially, unless they are able to send up unmanned missions.
Pre-supply missions
ahead of time. Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
Captain
Phobos asked me to say thank you for your answer to the previous question. Pre-supply missions and inflatable habitats, I suppose. Or I've seen talk of robotic construction. So some habitat is built in advance. Don't know. Because, of course, the pressure on Mars is a lot lower, so I guess inflatable wouldn't be that risky. And having such... Oh, I think Jim... Is it... Oh, yes. I see Casual's just come back. Are you all right there, Casual?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can. Sorry, I have no idea what happened there.
That's all right. You just froze and then disappeared.
I could hear you guys perfectly, and I was talking away, but obviously you couldn't hear me.
So...
That's all right, as long as you can hear me now. Sorry, I hope I haven't missed too much.
Well, you mentioned inflatable
habitats, yeah.
And they've tried. I don't know if they've had one in the chamber here at JSC in Houston. I think they did, but they were working toward that, and that it has to unfold.
Yep.
And it has to have protection from micrometeoroids and thermal and all of that. But the pressure part, that's not a big thing.
No.
And on Mars, the pressure is not 10 to the minus 17.
No.
In fact, the pressure is so high that the sublimator cooling system on the current spacesuits would not work. I think I've been told that. I haven't even looked at the numbers. So they were trying to develop evaporative cooling systems where the cooling water flows through little slightly porous tubes, just like a whole bunch of spaghetti things.
Yeah.
And the water flows through and evaporates through the pores of those little tubes and results in cooling of the water as it goes through. So after I retired, I went back to fill in. A couple of my friends said they needed somebody. So I agreed to go work part-time, and I helped with one of those tests. So that would be proposed for Mars as a possible cooling system. You have to have cooling. No heating in the shuttle or Apollo either. And the astronauts complain more of the cold than of heat.
Yes.
And the system couldn't adjust for that. You were always getting some cooling. It's just
I forgot what
side.
I mean. You said about these sublimator. I can't remember the word. Sublimation cooling, or yeah. But there's another effect, isn't there? I forgot what it is. The electrical cooling. I think casual. Oh, I thought you'd frozen again there, casual. I forgot what you call it. Is it a Messier effect or something like that?
Not sure, to be honest with you. I don't know.
I can't remember either.
There was one long ago that used thermocouples.
That might be it. I'm doing a bit of a Google as well, see if I can find it.
Now that we have solid state devices, there's cooling with solid state too.
Yes.
Okay.
I wonder if that's
but maybe it takes a lot of power.
Yes, I think it's quite a minimal cooling. Yeah, I'm having a bit of a look. Maybe someone in the chat. Oh, I can't say it. Meissner effect. MEISSNER. That sounds right. I don't know how it works, but it does. It's the expulsion of a magnetic field from a superconductor during its transition to the superconducting state when it's cooled below critical temperature. Actually, I'm not so sure if that is the same thing. I don't think it's to do with superconductors. Yeah, it's something else.
Right.
Piezo electrical cooling.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's very powerful, so whether it be enough for something like that, who knows? You could always leave the door open.
Right. I think probably it takes too much power for the cooling that you get, where a sublimator... The only difficulty with the sublimator, I guess, is producing. It's kind of like a metal sponge, and the pores in the metal sponge need to be large enough that ice can propagate through it.
Yeah.
And small enough that the liquid won't come through.
Right.
Okay, and I guess Hamilton Standard was in charge of the spacesuit. I jotted down the one. Hamilton Standard basically built the life support system, and they subcontracted the suit itself. Anybody remember the name of these folks? They were big. International Latex. International Latex. They built bras and corsets back in the early days, and so they were well suited. I saw a picture that said women at International Latex. They don't call it the full name now, just the initials. I guess IOC. Yeah. So I worked with all those people. That knowledge fades away. Hamilton Standard built propeller systems in World War II. But it had variable pitch blades, that sort of thing, the systems that control the pitch of the blades.
I've not heard of them, but I presume that's the same sort of technique as on the top of a helicopter, isn't it? Changing the pitch.
Yes. The same basic principle.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot more arms and levers and rods and stuff for helicopter pitch changes than on aircraft propellers.
Yeah, but they do change the pitch of propeller aircraft as well for different circumstances. So yeah.
Yeah, I think most of that was done through the hub, maybe, of the propeller system.
Yeah.
And on a helicopter, you can see a lot of the things outside.
Yeah, which is quite interesting. A guy called Lee has asked, in your experience, Jim, in the past, astronauts were flamboyant test pilots driving Corvettes. Now they are, quote, sensible scientists that go to space for research. Do you think that this trend of sensibility has hurt the space program?
No, I don't think it has hurt at all. Probably in the early days, that flamboyant style attracted the public to the space program and maybe helped generate some support back then. But they were all interesting guys. I didn't know all of these fellas.
No.
But you could kind of pick up a sense of their personalities from the news and other things that you might hear around the job.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's kind of an interesting question to me, because it's something that I think about quite a lot. And then, one of the reasons why I started my channel was that I wanted to get more people interested in space exploration, and particularly the history, because I think it's quite important. And rockets and what have you as well. But it's quite a challenging thing, because I can sit in front of people sometimes and start talking about stuff, and they kind of look at you and you can see the eyes glazing over. I'm really not getting you here, you know what I mean? And it's something that I'm really trying to learn to do. So I kind of understand where that question comes from, to be honest with you, and it's something that I would kind of like to explore. So I think you're right, Jim. In the very early days of Gemini, those guys were kind of
rock stars.
Yeah, rock stars, pretty much. Buck Rogers, they were expecting Buck Rogers to go up into space and, and these kind of things, and because people didn't really understand. And I think maybe that more things that actually people have learned over the years, it's probably become less interesting. But to me, the fact that that we're hopefully going back to the moon by 2024 is incredibly exciting for me. Honestly,
me too.
I'm like thinking about it, I get excited as like a kid being let loose in a candy factory and like, help yourself, son. That's kind of like what I feel like, and I can't wait for that day to happen. And I sincerely hope it happens. But Mars, putting boots on Mars is, for me, again, is something that I really desperately want to see before I pass away, and whether it happened in my lifetime or not, I don't honestly know, but I sincerely hope it does. And I'm really excited about that. And I think it's quite a good question. It's an interesting question, and something that I kind of want to solve. I want to get people interested in, but tricky, very difficult.
For me, I just really missed the Apollo program. I can sort of just remember bits about Skylab, but for me the big thing was the Viking landers on Mars, and the Grand Voyage, or the Grand Tour, and every couple years or whatever, right, we're approaching Jupiter, now we're approaching Neptune, and every time it would bring it back again, all that excitement. And I remember the early graphics, which were, it was just green screen graphics, and the planet was shown as just a circle with the lit portion being just an array of dots. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
But it was just so exciting. So with something like a new moon shot, or please a Mars shot, wow! I'm with you, Casual. Definitely. I think there's a very good chance of seeing a moon landing, and less of, but a good chance as well of a Mars, and I'm just so hoping I get to see it. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, my story with it that got my kind of interest was, I remember in the home that we lived in, my mum and dad had this big, well, I thought it was a huge chest of drawers, and in this bottom big drawer, I opened it. I think it was probably during holidays or something. I was bored, looking for something to do, and there was this photo album. It was like a big thick book. And I was flicking through all the photographs, and I thought, yeah, I'm not really interested. And then at the back of this photo album, I found what I understand now to obviously to be a newspaper clipping, and I think it was from the Daily Mail, which is one of the newspapers we have in the UK here in the UK. And I could recognise the pictures of the moon, and I recognised this thing that I knew was a rocket. But I didn't really fully understand what it was. So I took this thing and went to annoy my father, who was trying to work on something on the dining room table or something or other. But he took the time to explain to me what it was. And then from that point onwards, I was absolutely fascinated. But then when I started learning a little bit more about it and stuff like that, Mars kept cropping up, because this was sort of like the mid sort of coming to the late 70s. And, of course, we've done the moon. So people were talking about going to Mars, and that's always been the thing in my mind, that I want to see men walking on Mars. And I always keep thinking, maybe it'll be in the next 10 years, maybe it'll be in the next 10 years, and it's never really come. We've become stuck in this low Earth orbit kind of thing. It still had its benefits, but it's something I've always kind of dreamed about. And and if it does happen, that's a lifelong dream. Like I say, the same thing as well, me actually going to see a live launch. If those two things happen, I'll die a very happy man, as well as seeing my children get married and see my own grandchildren. That's one of many things I'd like to see. I'd die a happy man if that happened. Really would.
Well, I've only been to the States once, to Arizona. We do intend going again sometime, and I'd like to do a drive across the southern states, but I definitely want to go and see a launch if it's at all possible, and visit the space centres and so on. See a Saturn V. Wow. That'll be a dream for me.
Mr. Sensible, I could squeeze in one of your suitcases if you can.
Oh, man. Trippin Fool has asked another question, James. He said, Mr. Skipper, is it true that pilots and crew get more radiation flying commercial jets than astronauts did going through the Van Allen belts? I don't know if that... I know we touched on this earlier on.
I don't know.
Don't know. An honest answer.
Don't know.
Yeah. But like you said, the trip through the Van Allen belt was through the weakest part as quickly as possible anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah. Really, really fast. Really quick.
Let's see if we've got anything else here. How long before we have to make a distinguishment between astronauts and space tourists? So, I mean, do you have any idea of when we're likely to have space tourists? And we already have them in one sense. We've had a couple of multi-millionaires who've paid to go up, haven't we?
Yeah, you got the guy, I forget his name, that's in agreement with Elon Musk and SpaceX that there'll be he's taking him and his artist buddies on the Starship that's going to orbit the moon and then return. Well, that's going to be the first space tourism, really. It's for some very rich people, but yeah, that's going to happen quite soon. So we're going to see that, and also Blue Origin are going to be taking people up into suborbital flights pretty soon, once they can actually have their own spacecraft human rated. So that's going to happen pretty soon. So yeah, it's going to be soon. I would suspect at least within the next 10 years, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I guess you might refer to them as tourists. Didn't some of the rich guys get to go? Maybe somebody to the Mir. I know.
Yes.
One or two were able to go to the space station.
I know that they
I can't remember who they were.
They had to do masses of training, and they had to become fluent in Russian. So it's not your average tourist, is it?
Right.
and also have a shed load of money.
You could argue this tourists though. You could still argue that it was still tourists. You know.
Oh yes, yes.
You know, whether they're rich or not. You know. Okay. Yeah.
But it's not like the well. Should we go to Spain this year, or maybe for some, no? Let's go to the moon.
Yeah, good, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Well, do you guys realise that we've been going for close on 3 hours, and it's absolutely been
Yes.
flying
Oh,
by.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So
And it's late.
it
It's
is
late
indeed.
your time.
Yeah, but I don't find that a problem. I'm sure that Casual doesn't either, because James, once again, this has been absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been an honour.
Yeah. Casual said he could see in speaking to groups, you could look at their eyes and see they kind of glazing over. And that's how I feel sometimes in trying to explain things to people.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I don't know how many have stuck with this little
right,
talk we've had, but
quite
I
a lot.
appreciate it. Whoever.
We're still at 73, which I think is pretty good. We peaked quite a bit higher than that. I'm not sure exactly what we peaked at. And then, of course, other people. I've seen some people who said, "I can't stop. I'll watch the rest later." And of course, it's up there forever now.
Yeah.
So and by the way, James, I did put when you started talking about your website, I did put your web address across the top, www.jamesmskipper.us, isn't it?
Yes, and rather than having subdirectories for the different, like space and travel, family, and that sort of thing, it's all lumped in one big index page. So, but it's easy to scroll through and click on.
And I've had a good look, and it's some really interesting stuff. So I'd recommend everyone goes and has a look, definitely. Have you visited it yet, Casual?
Sorry, what's that? Yes, I have. Yes, the last time we talked, I spent a bit of time on a couple of days looking through your website. It's very, very interesting, really interesting. So, I hope you could, keep it updated. And keep doing what you're doing. It's extraordinary what you're doing, and I'm really happy that you're sharing it, your experiences, as well as your family as well. With the rest of the world, and I think it's brilliant. So, thank you very much. And also, just from a personal point of view, thank you very, very much for taking the time out to share experiences with us in this stream and the other ones, as well as also to your family, taking you away from them for a little while. So thank you very, very much to your wife and your sons. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Really, it's been great, honestly, and it's always a great thing to learn from somebody who's gone through the things that you've kind of done as well. So so thank you, really, truly.
And there's a couple of comments, James, I'd like to read, just from various people. Thank you, Mr. Skipper. This is awesome. Thank you to Mr. Skipper for taking this time for us. Thank you for being part of making things actually being real. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
And please, oh please, have Mr. Skipper back on again, please. I mean, I would certainly like to do this again sometime. I appreciate what you were saying the other day. If we keep talking about the same things, it could get stale for some people.
Right.
It wouldn't for me, but I would certainly love to do something like this again at some point. And I'm sure we're going to keep in touch, and we can, if you're up for it, we can arrange that at some point in the future.
Yeah. And it's nice to see someone young like Casual there who is so enthusiastic and so knowledgeable
Thank you.
about the space program. He spent lots of time and research on it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So that's good to see.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. No, well, I mean, it's all about getting more people to think the same way, hopefully, and that's one of the things that I do, and I keep talking about it to my kids. I'm not sure they're always quite as interested as I am, but I talk to them anyway. So they learn whether they want to learn or not a little bit about what happened in the history, because it's history is as important as the future for me. So I try and learn a little bit about both if I can. and I've certainly learned a lot from you in terms of the history, as well as actually your perspective on the future as well, which is
it is interesting, James, and I can only second that. Well, I think perhaps shall we wrap it up for tonight? Much as I regret it, yeah. A big thumbs up from Jim.
You're starting to get tired now.
Okay, all right. Well, Jim and Casual, if you could just stay in there for a couple of minutes, I'll explain why in a minute. I'd like to thank you once more, James. Really, really appreciate it. It's been great.
Well, it has been fun. I enjoy talking about it. People get tired of hearing my stories over and over, I guess. Have a new audience.
Not me.
You certainly have got a new audience. Okay, right. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to check out Casual's channel. I will, if it isn't in there already, I will make sure a link to that's in there. Thumbs up for the shield there. Always good stuff on there. I'll say thank you. Good night to Jim. Good night to Casual. Good night to all of you. Look forward to seeing you all again. Until next time, stay sensible.
Good night, all.
Good night.